We're live.
Woo!
Hello everyone! Welcome to the first episode of Pillow Talk, wink, a collaboration series where we sit with pillows in a comfortable space.
Very comfy.
And we talk about deep, intimate things that are not necessarily sexual. Sometimes they might be, sometimes they might not be.
You'll just have to subscribe and find out.
I like the way you think.
I'm linking it all in.
A little cheeky, a little fun, a little deep.
Yep.
That was not the right word because that could be taken sexually too, but
This is a deep conversation.
I'm here with one of my favorite people, Olivia.
Hello, world. Thank you for having me.
Olivia and I went to university together. She's one of my really, really good friends. We've had so many discussions throughout the years about biraciality and our experiences being biracial and what that means in society today. And so we've been talking about creating some sort of podcast or some type of content about this for literally years now. And so I'm so excited to be doing this. All right, Olivia, let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
On Pillow Talk.
Should we cheers?
Yes, let's
to
cheers.
Start? Okay. Cheers. Okay, so biraciality, what has that meant for you and what has that looked like in your life?
My life.
Yes.
So, obviously I'm white, but I'm also half Mexican. And most people are like, you're half Mexican? I'm like, yeah, I'm half Mexican. My father was born in Mexico. So, DNA is a very mysterious thing, but we do know that in terms of skin color, complexion, things like that, we see a lot of surprises.
Back in college, you actually researched companies like 23andMe and, genetic testing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm saying.
The consumer genetic tests. That was one of my emphases,
la la la.
my emphasis-isms
Yes.
in my writing course, because obviously I'm a very talented communicator. Anyway, yes, I did look into sort of the issue of how DNA is sort of at our fingertips as a society now, and how it's impacting consumerism in this country, and how it's also creating a lot of new questions, like how can this white person be half Mexican, or how come my sister is 6% Italian but my brother is 0% Italian according to this test. So DNA is mysterious. It shuffles around like a deck of cards for every new person and is packaged and sent into the world. So we don't really know what it's going to look like. So it was really fun. And it's also fun to talk about individual experiences, right? Because you and I, we are both biracial. Newsflash. We both have parents who look very different from one another.
Very different.
And quite different from ourselves, too, in some regards. So, it's fun to talk about these sort of things and sort of share stories, but also learn from each other and learn new experiences, because I think we're lifelong learners.
Yes. Very well spoken.
Thank you.
Great communicator. Yay DNA.
Yay DNA.
Yay
Long
DNA.
story short. So for you, I'm sure that growing up was pretty different than me or any other individual who is considered biracial or identifies as biracial. So what was it like for you? What's your biracial story?
All right, my #biracial story.
Biracial campaign. We're coming out, guys.
Yeah. Pillow talk. So for me, I am half Pakistani, half white. I guess that's the watered down version of it.
I love that. Watered down.
Yeah.
So
it gets complicated, but my dad's from Pakistan, my mom's from Texas. There's some Croatian and other stuff in there, but okay.
We could go on for hours.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, technically we're all descended from Africa if you go far back enough, but we're not going that far back.
No.
And so I've talked about this before in my previous video, trying to remember the title of now. I think it's called Feeling Unpretty.
Yes.
And basically in that video, which I will link in the description below, I talked about how in America, even though we kind of have this whole like, oh my god, like, yay, tan, woohoo, like there's...
Especially growing up in Southern California, which we both did.
Yeah, that's a good thing to add.
I'm telling a story like it's my story, but I'm an active listener, to say the least.
It's a shared story. We both grew up in Southern California. But yeah, so growing up a minority in America really has a lot of subconscious impacts on your view of yourself and your self-image and how attractive you think you are, because even though we say it's good to be tan, there's still this underlying notion that being white is the most attractive race to be. Especially growing up, it might be changing a little bit now with certain stars that are well respected and looked up to and admired. But
biracial celebrities, you mean?
Biracial and just like minority celebrities. Like I'm thinking like Priyanka Chopra and Ariana Grande. People that are thought of as like attractive who aren't white. But maybe that's always been the case, but I don't know. Anyway, I'm just kind of going on ramble. I feel like I've seen more of it in popular culture now than when we were growing up.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. Another thing that I talked about was I had this friend who was a Vietnamese descent, and she was seeing this guy and things didn't work out, and then I guess he started dating or seeing this girl who was stereotypical all-American with blonde hair, blue eyes. She told me that it hurt so much more, like obviously him being with a new girl, but the fact that she was this standard of beauty that she wanted to be growing up and was always told that this is what's pretty, and the fact that he chose this like stereotypical Western beauty over her like hurt even more, even though obviously that wasn't the reason why, they just didn't work out because they didn't work out, and he worked out with her because they worked out for whatever reason. But it just reminded me that for a lot of people, that's the experience, or at least the ingrained message that white is better, but that manifests in so many different ways. And what I think is really interesting with us, we've talked about this, is that I kind of look a little less white, and you said that you looked more white, and I looked
way more white than most biracial people.
Yeah. Growing up in our communities and kind of what our communities were predominantly made of. That's
so important. So important for your preconceived notions of how you fit in to not just your community, but different groups at your school, right? Or different minorities, and how they perceive you versus how you perceive them. And I think like what you're saying about maybe your experience and your friend's experience is that because you guys didn't fit a mold that was, the one that's being held on a pedestal in our country at this time, it manifested these insecurities. And those insecurities came through in your life in ways that don't quite make sense, but are so valid and important to talk about and share, because then you can empower other young girls
and boys.
Yes, and boys.
And all genders.
Yes, and everything in between. It's important to share these stories and be heard, hear other people, and expand your view, because that's identity. Identity is just a big portfolio of different lenses, different goggles. You're looking through your life and your perspective from your sexuality, from your ethnicity, from your culture, from the things you like to do after school, the subjects you like in school, what you want to be when you grow up. There's so many different things that make up your identity, especially as a growing person and a developing person who's much more vulnerable in this, frankly, difficult world we live in. It's still quite difficult even as adults, but I think that we've come a long way, and we're ready to talk about this.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to that. I like how this is like my gauntlet of ale or something, but it's literally just green tea.
I grew up in a very predominantly white Caucasian community. I was very lucky to grow up in a very nice area, but there were some people who were Pakistani, Indian, Middle Eastern, but there weren't that many, especially people who were half and half. So for me, I would, especially when I was younger, sometimes my parents would go to these Desi, Indian, Pakistani parties, and there would be kids there who were Indian and Pakistani, but both of their parents were Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi, Desis, the word, and they would know a lot of the culture and whatnot, and I knew part of it, but not that much. And then my white peers didn't really understand much of it, though a lot of my friends growing up, were very accepting and curious about the culture, but it was almost like I wasn't Desi enough with those kids who were. With my white peers, it would still be pointed out that I wasn't quite white either. And so it was kind of this like in between where I didn't really quite, in terms of my racial identity, fit in with either groups. But because I was surrounded by a lot of white peers, and also, post 9/11 era, there's a lot of anti-Muslim, anti-Middle Eastern stuff out there, which kind of, grains into your subconscious. 9/11 happened when I was 5 years old. But I remember as a kid, because I visited, my family and whatnot in Pakistan, I remember, like, when Bush was reelected, I was so upset, because I'm like, people, like, don't know that those are just also people over there, and those, like, people in the Middle East are gonna die, our troops are gonna die, people are just gonna die. Yeah, so I was very frustrated. There's a lot of frustration with politics from a young age, I'd say. Yeah. But it was interesting because that was very different from you, because you grew up really close to the Mexican border.
Yeah. So my community was very different. I grew up in a town that had military families, that had migrant worker families, that had some more upper middle class families that most of them were quite religious. I didn't grow up in a church, so I can't really relate to that. So I had trouble relating to everyone, basically, because I wanted to feel connected to the Latino community, because there's a lot of, first, second generation families in the town. And it was a very agricultural town, too, so there was a lot of migrant workers and their kids, too, coming in and out of my school. And it was a tough place to grow up. I mean, I'd be sitting next to a girl who didn't speak English, and 4 months later, after trying, becoming her friend and trying to communicate and trying to help each other learn and be kids, she'd disappear, completely disappear. And I assumed her parents were gone, too. And that happened every year, growing up. And, I didn't quite understand. I mean, now with ICE and everything that we know of now and detention centers, that's something that's a little bit more talked about. But it was something I felt, deep in my consciousness as a child in my community. So it was a challenging community to grow up in.
Yeah.
It was very emotional, I think. Despite that, I probably didn't quite understand the political aspects of all these, experiences and the impact they had on my community members. It almost makes me want to go back and be like, it's going to be okay, Jared. It's going to be okay, Sophia. Like, it's going to be okay, you. You're going to grow up, you're going to go to school, like, you're going to come back and get an education despite that, you were deported, and you're going to come back, like, you can do it.
Did they come back?
I've met some people who came back, yeah.
That's great.
Which is crazy to me, because it's just, it's the wild, wild west out there when you're crossing from Guatemala to Mexico, or from Mexico to the U.S. It's just, if you think our political system is corrupt, imagine being manipulated into doing things just so that you could, get a guide to take you to this one place where you could cross with your child who's, could have been shot dead in this village where he was born because of, drug violence or just any kind of power violence that is corrupting your... Anyway, yeah. I'm just going on.
No, keep going.
I'm getting way too emotional. Anyway, nonetheless, it was a big time. As a biracial kid, everyone perceived me as white, including the teachers. So when they would be selecting kids to let go into like the special math class or something, when you're so young and they're like trying to get you to learn even more. The brightest kid, I think I was in 5th grade or 4th grade. I was in 4th grade, and there was this one kid who was the math whiz of the class. And when it came time to pick out a student for the day once a week to go study with someone who's even more specialized in math to help them feel engaged and advanced curriculum and everything. They didn't pick him. They sent me, and I did not consider myself the star of the math class. No one considered me, not even the teacher, but the teacher and the higher education people that came in, they took me, and all the kids were so confused. They were like, why isn't that?
Olivia's still very smart, by the way.
I am smart. I'm not saying that I was a stupid kid. I think most kids I met in school were very, very smart. But did I not mention that he was of Mexican descent? Okay, so my classmate, I assume because he was of Hispanic descent and had brown skin and black hair, that, you know, they thought, well, if we're going to invest in one of these kids, we might as well invest in her. And that was really heartbreaking. And that's something that I've been very angry about, because these people who are supposed to believe in you and protect you still have these internalized racisms, and it's a big issue, and it permeates into even the most innocent of places, such as a classroom. So it's pretty heartbreaking. But anyway, in terms of my personal experience, because those were all kind of stories of other people that I was observing and reflecting on, my personal experience was interesting because I wanted to connect on a special level with people in the Chicano community, because I belong to that community. And so as a kid, I would try and insert myself, like, on the playground with some Chicano classmates of mine, and they would sort of shrug me off because they had their own thing going, right? So what I would do is I would just, the next time someone asked a question, I would just blurt out my answer in Spanish, and they would be so happy and surprised, and they would suddenly, you know, engage with me back. And I don't think that every Latina or Latino should know Spanish. You know, it's great if you do. I think it unlocks a lot of doors, makes travel easier. You know, if you have relatives that only speak Spanish, it's great for that too, which is why I learned Spanish. But, you know, I don't think being advanced in Spanish makes you more Mexican or more Puerto Rican or more this or more that. I think it's important that if embracing your Latino or Latinx culture is something that's important to you, that's great. You don't have to learn Spanish to do it. For me, however, as a kid, it seemed very, very, very important to learn Spanish, and I didn't, not as a baby. So I learned it in school. I guess in my household it was just easier to be a single language household, and since my mother is American as in white American, and spoke English growing up, and my father, the Mexican one, came over to study in college, he naturally integrated and spoke English, as that's what most people do when they attend school in America. So for me, I was a single language household, and that was hard to relate because all these other kids were lucky enough to have a bilingual household. I was always so jealous, even to this day. When I talk to people, I'm like, you spoke Spanish in your household? Yeah, it's so frustrating because it would have saved me so much time and effort. So for me, Spanish was like a key to unlock and resonate with this community. I joined the Latin dance team, which was like the sexiest, hottest thing to do in high school where I grew up. And I did that, and I was very outgoing for doing so. I do not know if I would do it now. I'm very proud of my 17-year-old self. And that was a big moment for me because everyone who was on that team was like the Latinx all-star. Like they were the Latinx, you know, football players and cheerleaders, right? I mean, we had those too, but they were mostly white, and I'm talking about like the really cool, in the Latinx community, you were the coolest if you were on this team. I joined that team.
Nice.
And our first performance was in front of the whole school, and it was at a pep rally, right? So that's in front of all of your peers. And afterward, for the rest of the school day, because it was in the morning, so I had the rest of the day, like 6 hours, to, you know, try and focus on class after having done this thing. This white girl dancing among all these brown boys and girls, right? And people just came up to me every 5 minutes, and said, wow, like, Olivia, that's so good for you. You know, I can't believe you did that. That's amazing. Like, what made you want to do that? You know, as if I noticed that you didn't belong there. Like, but it was amazing. You know, tell us about it. We're filming a video.
Oh, there's a video?
Yeah. And you should be in it. Come on.
What? Oh.
I thought I remembered like everything we've talked about, but now I feel like I'm telling new stories.
Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting because you really wanted to fit in with the Chicanx community, and you felt like you didn't look like that, right? You felt like you looked white, and you were trying to be part of this community.
To them that I belong with them.
Exactly, trying to prove. Whereas for me, it was almost the opposite. Like I was trying to prove.
Yeah.
Like I wanted people didn't really see me as white, so I was trying to like prove like, oh, I do have like, you know, my mom's white, blah blah blah. So it was almost like we were trying to prove that we were the half that we didn't look like.
Yeah, we were trying to feel accepted by both, which is difficult because we didn't quite fit the mold in either one.
Yeah.
And there's one distinction I should make. Now that I understand more after going to college and stuff about this experience, as a white person, you know, someone who walks down the street and gets the privilege of being and looking white, my experience throughout my entire life, I'm sure, has been completely different and probably, frankly, a lot easier than someone who is, you know, has brown skin or black skin. So when trying to assimilate with my Latinx community, there's probably going to be some degree of their experience that I'm never going to understand personally, and I'm never going to really fully be able to resonate with. So say this was me as a white biracial Latina trying to assimilate with, say, a bunch of Latina girls at the bar now as an adult, knowing what I know now.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be a little different than how I did it as a kid. I mean, for one thing, I wouldn't be in a bar as a child. But for a second thing, I will never try and assume that I can understand everything that they've been through. Because there was never a moment where I can say that I can fully understand what it's like to be a brown person in this country or in this world. I can resonate with their culture. I can resonate with a love for their language. I can resonate with the inside jokes that we all recognize from our culture. And I can resonate with all of the values that we share in our families underneath that culture. So there's so many things that I can share, but there is that one thing. So in a sense, I get it. I get it now why they were a little bit pushy at first, a little bit cold-shouldery when I was a kid and I was trying to kind of get in on that group on the playground. And I think as an adult, it might happen kind of similarly. I think it would play out quite similarly. And now I understand, and I appreciate that I understand that there's this one distinction, the color of my skin, the color of their skin. And I'm not saying that, you know, there's like a Crayola brown and a Crayola white. There's a huge mix of colors. There's olive skin, there's Mediterranean looking, there's more Spanish looking, there's more Indígena looking, there's more Mexicana looking. There's all these different shades of brown and shades of white that are blended together. And so, but the fact is that I just look white. So this is going to be something that's important in my story versus maybe your story or people who don't really come off white walking down the street. I think that you can never really judge a book by its cover. It sounds cliche, but you never know. But I think my closest friends that are white have been very accepting and keen on letting me talk about my Latinx side, and that's been really fun. I think I have more fun when I'm in an environment where I can really just, you know, I can wear both styles. I can switch back and forth or blend them, and I think that's when I feel most comfortable, is when I can, you know, explain an inside joke that comes from my, something between my Mexican cousins and I, or explain a meme on the internet to someone who might not understand the language or the implication. Explain the humor. Those are my favorite moments, and I also have a lot of stories of me traveling in Mexico.
So this is Ricky.
Hello, folks.
He is also a fantastic human being. and he is going to join us on this discussion today.
It's my pleasure.
So Ricky, Zareena and I have talked a lot over the years about our biracial experiences and how similar or different they've been, and we've had a lot of fun sort of connecting our stories and also being able to visualize what life was like as growing up or even now in the other person's perspective. And I thought it'd be fun to talk to you about you growing up, and you have a sister too, but you both approached your culture a little bit differently. So you want to talk maybe about that? Am I getting that right?
Oh, absolutely. What's kind of unique about my biracial experience is that I didn't have one, essentially.
Wait for it. Just
there's,
it makes sense. Hold on.
There's a distinction there, and the reason why is because for the first 10 years of my life, my mother's domestic partner was a Latin American woman, and we had several trips to Guatemala, which is where she was from, as well as an infusion of Latin American culture in our own personal lives. I have no genetic DNA of Guatemalan in me. Maybe there's a fraction of percent, so I'll wait until there's more sophisticated testing software. That being said, I'm genetically almost 100% Anglo-Saxon American with a fair amount of Greek in there. And really what I found interesting about that is that the difference in which the way my sister and myself, we took towards that infusion of culture.
Yeah.
And so for me personally, I have led a relatively insular life. I have a few things in my life that are truly important to me, and everything else I treat with less attention, whereas my sister, it's a huge part of her identity. She went to great lengths to learn and become fluent in Spanish. She studied abroad. She spent quite a bit of time professionally pursuing, hey kitty, pursuing a personal and professional interest in Latin American culture, and to her it's something that she couldn't live without. And that's what's so interesting is we were raised by the same people and had very similar experiences, and yet we ended up being so different in our biracial identity. In the same way that, you know, if someone is an atheist, it means a lack of theism. I guess I'm an racialist because I just don't identify in any particular way. I don't really identify as anything, and I think that's something I see missing from a lot of discussions of racial and gender identity is a lack of identity. I see myself as a human. I think that's a pretty safe bet for most people, and that's about what it comes to. I don't really view myself as a white person or a Guatemalan person, or even as a male. I don't really see myself in any kind of gender role or racial role. I only see myself through the lens of which I view the world, and it's never come into my life in a way that I personally manifest. However, I am not ignorant to the fact that my background and upbringing had a fundamental effect on who I am and what my life turned out to be. I think it's important for me to recognize that there were many privileges I had growing up the way I did, and not to discount them, but I also don't try to incorporate them into my life in a productive way. In fact, I try to leave behind my privilege and personal upbringing as much as possible and establish my own identity as the predominant one.
So I think it's cool that, because I know, well, you're an only child, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just double checking. You know, I think when I was young, I seemed to sort of embrace my Latina side more than my sister did. She does now. I think she sort of grew up and realized that's something she also wanted to get more involved in. But I just think it's neat that, you know, we're talking about biracialism, but really identity is, again, a very fluid spectrum.
Yes.
And in terms of your life, you know, despite that you have a Guatemalan parent, the Guatemalan culture side was something that hasn't really permeated into your personal identity. Despite that it has your sister, you know, you guys are totally free to make those decisions about your identity. You guys have Greek blood in your body, but you don't have Guatemalan blood in your body. Family isn't sometimes always about blood, and you don't have to share blood with, you know, countless Guatemalan people in order to love them and enjoy spending time with them and be welcoming to them. And also your sister doesn't have to have any Guatemalan blood to go and live in Guatemala for 2 years of her life and work with the community and essentially be a Guatemalan citizen for part of her life. And I think that's really cool. I think that's a cool story that we don't always consider, because we sort of see a mother and a father, you know, joining two nations versus, you know, two mothers creating a family.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your words, and I'm so thankful being on this segment, and I hope to get a chance to get to work with you again.
Also,
thank you.
I just wanted to say I really liked what you said about identifying as a human, and I think when it comes down to all identity, like as cheesy as it sounds, that is at the core of all of our identities. Even though we have different experiences, we're human, that's what connects us, and I think that's something that's very important to remember as we talk about identity. So thank you for pointing that out.
And please, those in the comments who have a lack of a human identity, if you identify as something else, we'd love to hear about those, so please share.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm very curious now.
Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you, Ricky.
I also just want to mention, just as a disclaimer, most of my white Caucasian friends were very accepting, at least my friends, you know what I mean?
I sure hope so.
Yeah, no, they were very accepting. It's just I realized with my looks that I was different, and I felt, especially in like, you know, those wonderful years of like 11 to 13, 11 to 14, where, you know, you're just figuring everything out, and there were, you know, aspects about my appearance and whatnot that I wish were less Pakistani, and it wasn't that I didn't like the culture, like I still loved that side of my family, I still loved the culture, I just didn't like seeing it manifest in me, in terms of like people being able to look at me and just like
have a
put a label on
notion,
it. Yeah, exactly. Everyone has insecurities, but mine were very rooted in the fact that I didn't look white. Like everything that I thought was ugly, quote unquote, about me was tied to me looking Middle Eastern, which is really heartbreaking because there's no race or ethnicity that is better looking than the other, and there's no features of those that are better looking. I mean, it's all, you know, just like relative. It was just heartbreaking that that's the case, and I know that that's the case for a lot of people beyond just myself. And I feel like talking about these things may help break that down.
Yeah. I think it's amazing how what we perceive through our eyes is so important to us. I mean, I think that everyone can say that they've looked in the mirror and imagined something different and been fascinated by that. I know that I've always been fascinated to, you know, show pictures of my aunt who's Mexican, and I show the picture to people and I say, like, hey, like, does this look like me? Like, what do you think of this picture? And they're like, oh, like, who is she? She doesn't look anything like you. And I think that what they see is, you know, the dark hair and the dark eyebrows and the dark eyes, and they don't, you know, see just how similar our faces are and similar our eyes are. And so that's something I often do, that as kind of a game. And I'm like, okay, who's gonna recognize? Because I do. When I look in the mirror, I see a lot of her. I also see a lot of my dad. In fact, when I was 11, like you said, in this awkward stage, I was quite young. Before I had acne, before I had any kind of puberty showing, my dad, for my birthday, sent me a picture of him as an 11-year-old boy. Oh. And I immediately ran to the bathroom, pulled my hair back, held up the photo, because at this time we hadn't been living in the same house for a few years. And so I was very excited to have this personal connection. And so I held up the picture and I pulled back my hair, and we looked like the same little kid. Except his was, you know, kind of an aged photograph and mine was live. But yeah, it was pretty amazing. And so I think that using your eyes is something that can be so powerful, but also so deceiving and also so painful, because we can be so critical of ourselves, sometimes even more than others, which, you know, is like you said, it's heartbreaking. But I think that it's important to embrace these areas of ourselves that even if there's a negative connotation, or even if there's internalized racism, that you look past that and think about what it means to you and how important that is to you. And if it's something that's not important, if how you look and how you walk through the world isn't important, even better. I mean, I think that makes things even easier. So, but you know, if it is something that's important to you, try and find those little things. I think this is something you talked about in your Unpretty video, is it's important to find those little things that you love about yourself and, you know, put those values into the world versus just trying to cover up the things that you don't like. And it's interesting to see how we've both been doing the same things, just with a different agenda. You know, you were trying to, you know, take out these parts and try and accentuate these parts, and me, I was trying to bring out more of these parts.
Yeah.
But we were both kind of doing the same little process. I know you've talked about that you were wearing really light colored bathing suits, and then all of a sudden you started wearing dark colored bathing suits. Or no, it was the other way around.
Yeah.
The other way around.
But I think I kind of became at peace with my Middle Eastern side really over time, because as at high school I thought, I knew that it wasn't fair and I shouldn't feel that way, but I still did, and I thought it was something that I would maybe never get over. I hoped I would, but I wasn't sure, and went into college, and you know, everything, you know, college is like this. But I used to always wear darker colors because I didn't want to accentuate my darker skin, so it didn't pop against my skin as much. And I was 20 and studying abroad and like living my best life, and I was trying on bathing suits with my friends, and I got this like really light pastel blue. It was a color I would have never worn in high school, and I was just kind of like, I'm wearing this and I'm laying out tanning with my friends. And I also obviously wouldn't really like to, I would try to avoid laying in the sun and tanning, because I would try to keep myself as not tan as possible, which I tan really easily and also sunburn easily, but whatever, it's fine. It was just a very gradual, almost like letting go, and it was just very subconscious again. It wasn't something that I overnight was like, I'm gonna try really hard to get over this. Like, it just kind of happened with me. And as I really like what you said about kind of almost a lack of identity, that almost in a way added to my identity, in the sense of I was just focusing on me as a person navigating college and being around these really bright, intelligent people and having these fun experiences, conversation, learning about all these different things. I just really grew into myself more, and I feel like a lot of people grow into themselves between like 19 to 21-ish, in whatever form of their identity, because a lot of people, you know, middle school, even high school, you're struggling with whatever it may be, whatever insecurities you may have, and people kind of grow up and grow into themselves. So I think that's kind of what it was, but it was just a very subtle letting go that made me like accept and, you know, feel empowered by my identity, but also not be defined by it either. Yeah. So
I think I had a similar transition where there was a couple years there, and I didn't realize it at the time. It's not like I went to sleep saying, okay, when I wake up, I'm going to be completely different. I'm going to view myself more positively, and I'm going to feel better about this and that. That's not how it works. But you're right. I had.
It'd be nice if it
did. It would, right? When you go to bed tonight, no.
Try it out.
Be patient. Just practice self-love and think critically about your life, and maybe you'll get there sooner than us. Anyway, yeah, I had the same thing where, you know, I reached a point where I realized that I was able to be a triple threat, and I was able to juggle all of these different sides of me without having to hyper focus on one at a time. And that's when I felt really so comfortable. And I think you're right. I think it's not overnight. It's something that you grow into. It's something that you fine tune. And it's a good feeling once you realize that you've made progress, and you've made it so far, and you're happy.
Yeah.
Woo.
Also, in the comments, please let us know what your experience with identity is, if you feel okay sharing that, whether it's biracial, one race, growing up with the different, you know, race parents, or it doesn't have to do with race at all, just your experience with your cultural ethnic identity.
Yeah.
We would love to hear that, because obviously there's a range of experiences, and the more that we share experiences,
that is why we were here. We want to better represent this range of identity and biracialism. Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Olivia,
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
It's there's been a lot of conversations throughout the years, and it was fun to kind of sit down and share them, and hopefully open up our conversation with more people. It was a good time. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about anything where people can find you, like your website or any...
I am a dinosaur. I am extinct. I do not exist. No, I'm just kidding.
Online.
I am very not online. I'm not very accessible. But if you would like to reach me, please comment down below, because I will be waiting like a shark to hear what you guys have to say. And I'm really excited to expand this conversation and include you with it. So please, please, please tell us. It doesn't have to be from when you were a kid. It could be from yesterday. Even if you think it's, stupid or small or just like everyone else's, we want to hear it because we all are so different. But we have all these things in common. So let us know. Come back. Share more. If you're walking down the street, there's an awkward thing that happens. It has to do with identity. Let us know about it. We love to laugh along. Please tell us about it.
Yay, identity!
Yay, biracialism!
Woo!
#biracial. Thank you for having me on the first episode of Pillow Talk.
Of course! Thank you for being here. Yee!
You
Hello.
can move it if you want.
Do you want to say your own name?
I'll just say my first name.
Okay.
I'm afraid of social media.
I'll just say Olivia.
There we go.
Yeah.
I'll get all
Just
the
good
goofies
content.
out.
All the what?
My
Yeah, all the
goofies
goofies.
out. You're a good boy. I feel like I'm getting so preachy. I'm like, I'm here to change your world.
Well, you've certainly changed mine.
Aww.
It's all good. We'll cut it out. We'll cut a lot of this
We'll
out.
cut this out.
We'll cut the whole video out. Wada wada. Wada 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 wada.
I feel like if I were to do this myself, like to have this as an undertaking, I would just be like, you could probably find a GIF.
GIF.
A GIF.
A GIF or a GIF?
I say GIF.
Alright, we're starting controversies here.
Giphy?
Jiffy?
Jiffy?
Jiffy
GIF.
Giffy?
GIF. What do I call it?
I feel like we have enough.
We have enough.
content.
Okay. We have enough.
We have enough. We are enough.
We're having too much fun, so we're just gonna keep talking.
Are we? Okay.
No,
Sounds good.
We should probably start thinking about dinner though.
Yeah, we should eat. We should eat food. Food is good.